Good morning. Welcome to the session, Monitoring Literacy Strategies in Education Using Power Platform. My name is Scott McKenzie. Before we start, I'd just like to say thank you to the sponsors of ScriptRunner, DQ Global, Proximo 3, Radspire, Genesis, and High-Tech Solutions. So a little bit about myself, Scott McKenzie. I work at Fort Vermilion School Division. It's a school division in Canada, in the northern part of Alberta, and I'm the business systems analyst within the division. So a quick introduction. So like all good students, I just moved to Canada about 5 years ago. As you can maybe tell from the accent, I'm actually from Scotland, born and bred in Aberdeen. So I moved to Canada 5 years ago, or just over 5 years ago now. And on going there, I attended my daughter's new school on the first week, and we did the parent teacher night. So the principal at the school, a gentleman called Greg Kushner, had introduced a new literacy strategy they were doing to monitor student performance in literacy. And he spoke at length about it and how they were doing it. And they've been participating with a research group called JP DAS, based out of University of Alberta. And JP DAS Centre has actually done some studies around the world now in literacy and literacy mathematics and scoring. So he went through the story and he was explaining it, and he was explaining some of what they were having to do at the time. And at the time, they were taking approximately 200 hours per year to score this data. Now, 200 hours doesn't sound a huge amount, but in a school, in a school system, especially in Canada, where every hour is under collective bargaining agreement with the unions, 200 hours is pretty bad. Over and above that scoring, there was then the verification of it, and then they had all the data analysis of it, and that was just to get it into one class, one group, without really any analysis. So at the end of the session, I sort of raised my hand and said, look, this is kind of what I can do on a day-to-day basis. Maybe I could help. It was maybe the wrong thing to do. It took 3.5 years. I worked with 12 schools in the Alberta or in the Edmonton School Division as a volunteer. It was about over 3,000 hours. We developed the workbooks and how it was scored. And then towards the end of that, I was introduced to Mike McMahon, who's the superintendent for Vermilion School Division. And he then wanted to take it on. And through conversations, he actually offered a job, which was good for me. It was a nice change. So Fort Vermilion School Division, like I said, it's in Canada, it's in Alberta. It's in the very top corner of Alberta. It's huge area, 87,000 square kilometers, about 12% of Alberta's mass. But it's quite a diverse population. It includes a lot of the First Nations, so Beaver, Dene, Cree First Nations. It's got a strong Mennonite community as well, which interact, and then there's a lot of incomers. So the actual region itself is very diverse. The actual distance is very diverse. So we've got 16 schools within the division. Between the east and the westmost school, it's about 250 miles apart. North to south is about 150 miles. Now, at this time of year, currently at the moment, last week we had minus 47 degrees temperatures and quite heavy snow. So traveling to in these schools is obviously quite an issue. So trying to get everything sort of cloud-based and reportable without a lot of transient effort is obviously quite important. So I'm going to go into what we did and how it's done and so on. So the initial planning at Fort Vermilion was to get this literacy project that they'd done down in Edmonton under the study and extend it out. Now, because I had built the workbook, it was obviously a far easier premise. I knew what the data should look like, what the methodology needs to be, and how it should be structured. Coming to Fort Vermilion, however, I recognised that they didn't actually have Office 365. So that was almost the starting point. We had to go and look at getting Office 365, get that deployed. So that took us a couple of weeks to get rolling out, and it was a very light deployment initially, and that was just to get them in and get them planning. This is now 2 years into the deployment of 365, and we're extensively involved in it, and you'll see some of where we are as we go through. The biggest part is obviously deployment. So it's all structured around SharePoint stroke team groups. Each group has a very distinct set of libraries, and they have a workbook, which is Excel. Now, the reason I always chose Excel and still work with Excel to this date is that schools are a very transient workforce. Teachers are coming in and out at least almost every year. Their focus is obviously on the school integration systems, classroom studies. It's not to learn new technologies. And although I've looked at rebuilding the system within Power Apps and a couple other areas, or some of the existing SIS, the school integration systems, to actually have something that people can pick up and work with pretty easily is actually being one of the biggest things. And Excel, you know, if you've used Excel, great. If you've used Google Sheets, great. It's pretty much there. So I've decided to keep with Excel at the moment. But part of that is obviously getting the content type deployed, so it's again consistent. So if you're in one school and you go somewhere, it looks exactly the same as another school. So deployment was rolled out again pretty quickly. One Excel workbook, couple of libraries, and done. And then obviously the next part of that is the change management, and that was quite a big focus initially. How they use the workbooks, what they do, how the data should be filled in. Expecting people to fill them in a way that you designed it is an expectation that doesn't always necessarily, you know, figure along. I mean, I expected a date to be filled in as a date in Excel, but where I'm used to just typing in as, you know, 2-2 to get 2nd of February, people were typing in 2nd of February, they were typing the full name, which was breaking the cell. So again, there was a lot of focus around the change piece. So there was some one-to-one training, there's some group training, and again, I created the sort of a Word document just to hand out as a user guide for them. So this is the process it goes through at the moment, and this is extended out as we've developed features. Excuse me. The primary is obviously the SharePoint team site. So these are where the workbooks are housed, and these are secured against each school. So if you go into school, you're only seeing that school. Again, the class workbooks are below, and they're stored in the SharePoint library. So we have two main libraries. We have the current library and we have the archive. So this year's workbooks are obviously in the current. At the end of the year, they'll be moved into the archive library. And that movement is also part of the Power Automate, which I'll show you in the demo. So I know where to pick up the workbooks and what to do with them. Each day, in fact, 4 times a day at the moment, the workbooks are extracted. So the table data is extracted out of them. It's conformed, and then that data is concentrated into a JSON blob, and it's actually stored within another SharePoint site, which is my admin site. So I actually use SharePoint to do blob store rather than Azure. And this, again, is a cost thing. It's not necessarily the best option, but school divisions are tight in budget, so not having to extend out Azure into table storage or blob store just makes a bit more sense. We have looked at it. We might move it going forward as we start to move things into the cloud a bit more, but at the moment it uses SharePoint. Once it's in SharePoint, I then use Power BI. So I'm using a couple of different parts of the Power BI. When we first started, we only had Power BI Pro, and we gave it to a couple of users. And they were primarily the sort of principals of the school and the executive management of the division. And it was okay, and it worked no problem. However, the one thing was that the data flow and the available data coming in was actually beginning to start to slow down. And we were beginning to get an hour to 2 hour refresh times within the service. So again, this migration of data into the blobs was part of that process to speed up. Originally, it would just extract from the Excel. Then I'd put it into a SharePoint list and read the list. And then it went to JSON. So there's been iterations through, and the JSON packs are far better. But part of that was with the Power BI is we went to the Power BI capacity plan last summer. And we're going with this capacity plan now. This allows me to use the Power BI data flows. And that has been significantly better to use doing the ETL through the data flow. It allows me to mash up more data now. We're now taking in data from our Dataverse using some of our business units. We're also taking in data from our external school information system. And again, that's done on data flow using ODBC connectors on a Power BI gateway with an Oracle database at the back end. We have some other cloud flows that we're using from other systems. So the data flow now has allowed me to take in all the individual components to get much better mashed up reports at the back end. Once that data flow is done, obviously the data set's there, and that's now consumed by Power BI report. Again, with the Power BI capacity, we've now got paginated reports, and we have Power BI dashboard. And the dashboard is actually more than just the literacy. This process has now been extended out to numeracy as well, where we're doing numeracy scoring, but instead of using Excel, we're actually using Microsoft Forms to do tests and get the results. And we're also doing connectivity surveys with our students. And again, that's been a combination of Microsoft Forms and Google Forms in some cases, and we're getting all that data. And because we've now been able to connect to the back-end student information system through data flow, we're now able to consolidate this data and be able to start looking at results across literacy and numeracy. You would do numeracy results get impacted if a student can't read or can't understand, or is this been a transient error in the data? So the actual data flow and the capacity has given us much more insight into what we're doing. So again, this is the another part of it. What we're also doing within the reading data analysis is that we're actually now doing this through to the analytics of teacher performance and teacher rubrics. So we've actually been getting some data in from teachers, looking at what teachers are doing, what scoring they're doing, how they expect it. Again, pretty similar, but it's a form. And we're taking this in, we're taking it into Power Automate. We extract it into a SharePoint list. And then that information is taken into Power BI through data flow. And again, we're able to mash this. So we can now actually see, the scoring of the students against the literacy aspects, but then we can actually see what the teachers have done in respect of, new teacher methodologies. Has this one been more successful? Has this one been less successful? And now we're starting to take this into financial planning and metric planning. So we can start looking across the division of which ones have produced a better result, which ones have been more cost effective on the results. And again, we've been able to take that and there's a much bigger data set. So the more we're using Power BI, the more that we're extracting out, the more information that we're able now to really get down and nail down to. So I'm going to come out of the presentation and I'm actually going to go into our tenant and I'm going to go into our live tenant. So this here is a sample of one of our school sites. Obviously, I just put this one together very briefly. So each school has got a site similar to this. There is actually more on the side pan in terms of libraries and so on. But within here, we have our reading program. This is the content databases. So this 3T scoring workbook is a deployed content model that we can create new ones from. Once we've created it, the teachers are then going in and we take in the student details. And these students are actually all false students, so there's no data being shared here. And they're literally using their student number, first name, last name, date of birth, and so on. And then they're filling in per form. So this is known as what's called 3T. 3Ts is because it's three different types. So we have TOSREC, TOSREF, and we have TOWRE. So these are the three literacy tests that we're doing. And we actually have 3 periods that we run them in. So Form A, B, and C, which essentially equates to autumn, winter, and spring. So we do these 3 times a year, and this progresses them through. So the teachers essentially put in the assessment date, what the correct error or total were, and then the workbook actually calculates these raw scores here for each of the tests. Now, behind this workbook, there's actually 640,000 scoring calculations that it actually looks up. So there's a whole load of hidden tables behind here that has 647,000 lookup tables that works out this scoring model. And this is what used to take the 200 hours, because for each test you would have to look up the age of the person, figure out the chronological date of that person from the test date. Once you've got the chronological test or the chronological age, you have to look up the form that you're running, find their correct score, find their error, get that score, then look that score up against another table to get their raw score. And you'd have to do that for each student, for each form. So you can imagine if a class or a school with maybe 30, 40 classes, these suddenly get into hundreds and hundreds of hours. So the workbook does this automatically for them. So that's the date entry. And then on the class profile, the teachers have a very simplified method of seeing where their scores are. And these are essentially the rubrics of the test. So students that's marked in the red, these tier 3s, these are the ones that are having a literacy issue. And there's any number of reasons, comprehension, reading, understanding the words. Now, normally what would happen then is once these people are identified, they go into an intervention program and they would get sort of one-to-one help and go through for a period of 8 weeks. When it's taken 200-300 hours to score these, this 8 weeks was getting reduced to maybe 4 or 5 weeks. So the students weren't getting the full benefit of the intervention. Now, the moment our students are scored, they know if they need to go into intervention. So the process of moving students into these things, again, is significantly quicker. For tier 2, these again are students that need some help, but they can be done in a group, not necessarily one-to-one. And then we've got good and we've got superior students. So this gives the teachers a very quick sort of overview of where they're at, and they can see it. So they would keep building out all their workbooks, and they might have 10, 20, 30 workbooks in here. What then happens is that Power Automate, I'll just open up this one. We have a number of different Power Automates, and essentially there is one per school. And that's to keep the load down to make sure that I'm not conflicting. So as you can see, it's set in array occurrence. I set all my variables up here, what my school sites are, my aliases, where all the site mappings are, and then all my different variables. So what this does, because it's Excel and people are using these all the time, I don't want the Power Automate to go in and get the workbook when they're working them. Excel with the collaboration and SharePoint, as everybody's seen it, can sometimes lock and you get record locking. And so I don't want the record locking to help. So I've got my current year and my archive. So it looks up the 2 different libraries within the system, what the name definitions are. Then what it does is it actually goes and for everything that exists in my current collection, it actually takes a copy of the workbooks and actually puts them into a separate site, which I'll show you next. Once it's in the separate site, which I know that nobody is in, it actually goes and does the extraction from the tables. So it looks at the workbooks, it then extracts the data from each of the rows, filters out all the blanks, and then for each student composes an array. There's my array that I'm getting. So these are the table fields within the Excel table, and then just keeps adding to the array. And then I do the same for the scoring. And then once all the arrays are built, it then composes the JSON packages, for both the results and the student, and then it creates the file in my master site. And again, it creates a results file, it creates a student file. I also do the same for the archive. So it looks at my current collection, then it looks at my archive collection, and I do them. So these run at the moment every 4 hours. They take, on average, about 20 minutes to copy all the workbooks, extract all the data, and build the JSON. So for every 4 hours, 20 minutes is not too bad. So like I said, this then goes into my master admin SharePoint list. And again, this is just a standard SharePoint. So you can see all my recent. So these are all the copies coming in when they were last coming in. So I have my data extracts library. So all these JSONs that I'm building, this is where they're going. They're basically going straight into my scoring administration library. And you can see they were updated and when they were updated. So some of the archive ones, obviously I don't run every day. If I've got changes, I'll run them. But most of them are just there. So it's mostly the current runs that you'll see running. This is the actual extract library. So this is where it copies all the files. So there's the file name, what the school aliasing is, when they were last copied. So do that, and then it comes through to my Power BI. And this is what it actually produces now. So within the Power BI, this is my standard report. Now, this data is all obfuscated, so I can show it quite happily. So there's a load of filters in this. So this is currently filtered just to our current year. If I actually take this off, apply it, you'll see why. So we obviously have a massive data now. And we can track it. So as we're doing these things, I want to be focused primarily on what we see. Again, this is one of the lessons learned from doing this over the last couple of years. The Power BI, when you start giving it to people, if they're not using it all the time or if they're not familiar to it, trying to get them focused or trying to understand where they click, what they click is quite hard. So again, all the visual header, top things, other than the focus fields, none of the other fields are visible. So they can't do drill down options or filter. I made the report as simplified as I can. Again, a reading key here where they literally can click the blue and they'll see the scores or the good. So I tried to be as clean as I can to assist with this transient workforce and try and get them in. These are essentially all the scores. So this is taking the average or the standard mean of all the scores out of that Excel. So this 90, the standard score of 90 is made up from 109 students, and you can see within that breakdown of, you know, where the severe, the TV, superior and good are. So 44 severe 3, 36 poor 2, and 21. So again, we can see at any point where they are. Again, the years, and then these are the different forms, A, B, C. So the likes of grade 1, they don't actually report grade 1 on the first period. They only do period B and C. Again, you'll notice there's quite a few missing data. Fort Vermilion last year, 1920, in Fort Vermilion itself, we actually had flooding. So we actually had 2 schools closed due to flooding. One was actually flooded so badly it's actually closed, and we've had to combine it. And then the year before, 2018, 2019, we had actually forest fires where there was 12 schools closed. And we were closed down from a period of March right through. So there is some gaps in these, and that's been primarily due to, you know, local disasters, being flood or fire, the last couple of years. This year, we are hoping to get through the 3 periods, all be waived. So COVID exceptions, we should be good. So we can go through and we can filter. And now on this, there's the overview. So I can now go into any given school and see the numbers again on the school. So I can click on the school, see the comparison between the school. Again, you can see our total numbers and total reporting as it's going through. Again, they can do this from the filters, which is on all the pages as well. So I just do school, and then I can also get my division. So I can see division 1, 2, 3. I can see just my grades within here. I could go to specific classes if I wanted to within that. I can change my standard score calculation, this part here, from a mean to an average score. It does affect the results slightly, but they wanted to be able to do that. Again, intervention. So this is where these students have been identified as having an issue. We can see who was put into different interventions and whether their results have improved. Within the class, I can then see all the students within the class, where they are within their periods. And again, I can see all these years. So if I actually clear the years, I can see all the years going forward. Again, I could take that off and see all there. I take off all the years. Now, this is, at the moment, it's just under 1 million rows of data. And you can see that it's actually pretty quick considering what it's actually doing and all the performance it's doing. Again, this is coming through from the data flow. It's actually improved the performance significantly quicker on this. This one up here, these numbers here represent obviously the tiers. This number up here represents the rubric that the province looks at for proficiency. So whether we've got proficient, close to proficient, far. So this is where our students would, these would be the students that essentially would be graduating, what we'd expect to move between grades or move between schools. These ones are still to get there. So they generally will correlate. If I do a red one, you'll see how many are far from proficient. There's one. Again, I can see these are all individual students, so it should just be one. And I can zip up and down between them. Here's all the interventions. I can actually go and see student profiles. So I can actually look at a student across the years. Most of these are single at the moment, but if they have more than one result, so this one here has got grade 1, grade 2, grade 3. So I can actually see the results across the 3 different grades as he's moving forward. Again, 7, 8, 9 grades. So you can actually track them across the years. We have a reading tiers one. This is a very messy chart. This one is a very high level one that's used by the executive to track all the numbers. Again, we can actually take it down by sort of applying some filters, which makes it less messy. Again, you can see all the years. So if I take out just the current year, we can see the progressions between fall, winter, and where we are between numbers. And again, this rubric one is exactly the same, where this is the provincial scoring rubrics that we have to report back to Alberta Education. Like I said, because of going into Power BI capacity, we've now got the ability to go through to paginated reporting. So again, these hyperlinks will now open up paginated reports. These are all using the URL filters. So I'm passing the URL parameters into the report. So again, this is all laid out. We can see obviously the page view, and then the teachers and the principals have got the ability to export these out as PDFs or Excel lists and so on. Again, they use this for collaboration, for evening meetings to go through and see where they are within scoring. So we've made quite a bit of sort of movement and progression within both the Power BI and the Power Automate platform to do the thing. The essence is that we still are heavily reliant on SharePoint. We're still heavily reliant on Office 365. And SharePoint's more so to be able to keep the cost down. Like I said, we could build these blobs and JSON packs and put them into Azure, but it's trying to keep a cost down. So by using this cost model where you can use SharePoint, you can use Power Automate to do certain things, it certainly makes life more cost-effective from a skill point of view. It also shows the versatility of using the Power Platform across the whole gamut. Like I said, we have other ones that we do for numeracy. And again, they're coming in from Microsoft Forms. I would just open up an example one here. So here's all our literacy data collectors. You can see they're all running differently there. Here's our numeracy one. So again, this is a form that was built in Microsoft Forms. It has all the questions in it. We get the form in, we get all the variables, we get the form response, we create the assessment response within SharePoint, and then we store that in a list. And then we take that back into our Power BI. And if I actually go back to our main sort of Power BI, you can see here we have an excessive amount now of Power BIs, and this is just actually one workspace. We actually have a lot more than this. So we have all our numeracy ones. If I just actually do this numeracy demonstration, you'll see exactly the same. So again, we can do all our different tests between the different grades. I can click on the grade, see what the pass-fail is. We can see the assessments. But not only assessment, we can look at the questions, what the answers were, how many. So this student got this question wrong. That should have been the answer. This is what the student's answer is. We can see all of those against each of those. And then the written response is similar to what we're doing with the written rubric, where the teachers actually do a verbal test in the class and use Excel to do this verbal test score. And we're still able to take this in. So again, number of happy faces, they just take a snapshot of the numbers. And again, we can see where these numbers are, how many they are in the ring. So again, between Microsoft Forms, Microsoft Excel, using SharePoint to store the data within lists, to extract the data out of Power BI through data flows, we're using quite a lot of the work set. Our dashboard, which we use for our management tiers. So this is what our executive and our shareholders are going into, looking at all the high level reporting. So here's all our literacy data. We then have our numeracy data below it. And then we have all our connectivity data below that as well. So where students are connected with peers and peer support. And again, this is all now that we can drill into a student and see where they are. You know, is their literacy score due to maybe something connectivity, they don't feel happy or something's bothering them. So we can now really start to drive into all these things much more quickly. We now have our budgets in here as well, where we're now looking at this. You know, how much have we spent to do this intervention? What was the results? How much did it move the metrics forward? So looking at our live budgets, trying to do budget planning for next year, where is the money better suited for some of these interventions and programs going forward? So this is giving a lot more visibility to senior management going forward, giving them a lot more flexibility in what they're doing. We also have our document center. So again, this is all the documents related to student reporting. Our whole document center is based on, we've got compliance running, we have retention labels running. So every document that we're creating for a student around their reporting, put in this document center. We have retention labels applied there. That's then tied back to compliance. So we can go in and do a whole e-discovery compliance, get all the information out. So we're using huge amount of the Power BI workspace and Power Automate, as well as the 365. I actually just go into this other workspace. So here is our data flow environment. And again, you can see we have quite a few data flows running at the moment. So our business units are actually coming in from Dataverse. We actually use Dataverse now quite extensively through Power Apps for some of our competence management systems, for some of our referral systems. So we use the business units in here for reference. This is our competency evaluation. So again, teacher competency. Here's all our students coming in from our school data sync and from our integration system. We have our users coming in from Graph API, which we also take in from Power Automate. We actually, this one here in the data flow actually calls Power Automate as an HTTPS request, which then calls Graph API as a custom connector, which then takes in all the users and then we transfer them. So rather than using some AD methodology or export, we're actually doing this live in Graph using Dataflow and Power Automate as well. Here's our literacy data set. So these are the two that we have, our current and our iCard. These are our actual live ones. And then we have all our references. So our norm references for the workbook, all our responses. PowerSchool, again, is our student information system, the Oracle database that we connect to and we can get the extracted information, demographics out of. We have all our reading data analysis. So as you can see, we use an extensive amount within the solution to do this. But the power that is actually given our administrators and everybody else has been significantly high. Go back into here. So areas to consider. Obviously, requirements gathering. This kind of was always one I knew about, but understanding the needs. Certainly schools and Power BI has been a new factor to them. They didn't realize the data they could get. So the first couple of iterations of this, what they wanted to see, what they expected to see, they weren't quite sure of. So it took quite a while to actually understand what they wanted, how they wanted it, what the frequency is going to be, what interaction and where everything is. So the requirement gathering, it's a big factor still to consider. Power BI is a wonderful tool, but you can either give too much, too little, you can allow them to drill in. And that's the area that I made, a lot of assumption to start with, that people would just be able to pick it up and work it and get to the data they needed. And that's not necessarily the case. The people are in there all the time, the executive level, the finance is fine. You can train them, they get into it. But at the teacher level, the lower level, where they're maybe in once every couple of weeks and then they forget what they're doing, then they can't see it, and you still expect them to drill in or filter, was harder. So that requirements gathering is a fundamental area. Again, the service availability. What are you going to collect? Is it third-party tools? Is it 365? What can you use to collect data that isn't necessarily a huge burden licensing costs? Excel, SharePoint, Microsoft Forms, the Dataverse now in Teams, that whole sort of Dataverse within Teams can now be used at a very lower level with no additional cost, but obviously it's just a set of how much data you can have in there. Deployment and training. That's obviously one of the big things. Do not expect when you give Power BI to people that they're going to see it or understand it or understand the numbers. If they click on this, what does this do? The context of, they're normally used to, in Excel, 2 + 2 in cell A, B equals 4 in cell D. What they don't get is the concept of keeping measures in context. If I filter this or if I apply this, the number needs to be able to calculate always. So that deployment, training, getting people used to what they expect to see, how they want to see paginated reports. Are they comfortable with generating their own paginated reports? Do you need to pass URLs from your Power BI reports that takes that ease of burden out? And these are all small wins, but collectively they're actually quite big. Budget. Again, as the school division, budget is one of our primary concerns. We want data, we want analysis, we want to be able to do things, but budget here is focused on students, IT systems. We have to sort of be very careful about what we spend and what we spend it on. So, again, this is the SharePoint, the Microsoft Forms. What can we utilize that's within our stack that doesn't cost any additional details? The Dataverse within Teams now kind of have a lower level of database, to do it within Teams, so I'm not having a full CDS license. Calendar, custom dates. Again, we're maybe constrained with schools where we have a very sort of defined period, much like a fiscal reporting period, but using custom dates within Power BI, custom date calendars within Power BI is an absolute godsend. Really using those, being able to filter down. Again, within Power BI, some of the recent changes like metric groups again, takes down the speed. If you can build all your measures into measure groups where you're only calculating one measure depending on where you're, what's being displayed, the need for hundreds and hundreds of measures which are originally had in there becomes to come down if you use measure groups. And again, change management, always the fundamental. The ability to react effectively, efficiently. I found using this, the more that you give them, the more it's like, oh, could we get, oh, would it be possible? And of course it is. It is absolutely possible. If they want something and it's within the tenant or it's within the capabilities, yes, it's possible. But the problem is, if I add this next data set to this existing Power BI report, what does this impact? How does it change my numbers? What URLs do I need to pass? Does it, give a context that's, skewing the numbers one way or another? Do I just put in a secondary dashboard at the moment or second report and not connect them? Do I need to put it through the data flow process to make sure that, I can mash these up rather than building one report? Do I need to be reusable? If I'm going to have reusable data sets, it's better to use data flow. I can reuse them without rebuilding them. So all these things are in there, but using these and the areas to consider, it's great. You can go forward, you can do a whole load of things with it. Finally, Michael McMahon, so our superintendent, so again, as a comment from Never School, had the ability to interact with real-time data and impact instruction. So again, Power BI, Microsoft Suite Exchange Flow work. It's made the division more responsive. And again, we're able to react to student needs now. And it's not just the Power BI and the student data. We've now extended this out to HR processes. We're doing health and safety data collection. So like incident forms are now done through Microsoft Forms, stored in SharePoint, produced into Power BI. Competence assessment is done in the Dataverse in model-driven apps. We've got finance requests now being done in Canvas-based apps using SharePoint backlists. So the whole Microsoft suite, the whole Power BI, the whole Power App suite has really sort of connected. Power Platform has been a great tool for us over this last year. This year is bringing some more exciting challenges, and we shall see how it goes. But thank you very much for your time. I'm glad to be able to present today. Hopefully some of this information has been useful to you. I'd love you, if you want to, certainly reach out. My Twitter account is on there, and if you want to reach out for anything further, please give me a message on the app or through Twitter. Thank you once again.